Hungary, almost Eastern Europe, Central Europe. And then we made a detour from Ireland to Suriname and all other locations on the route. But now, really, without further ado, Rabbi Mendy Chitrik traveled all the way from Istanbul to share the day with us, and I'm sure you will enjoy what he has to say.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you for inviting me here. Now, I'm not an academic like the Honorable Judge and the professor who spoke before me, so I will not I can't match up to the research that they invested time, but I will try to speak of my experience and of what is going on in the Muslim world today. We'll try not to be politically correct, but still try to paint a picture so people can understand what is life in the Muslim world today for Jews living in the Muslim world. And this is really, it's try to condense this in 45 minutes. Won't do justice, but we'll try to do whatever we can. Start with a small map. Everybody here showed maps, so I have to have a map. It's a small map of where we have Jewish communities currently, Jewish communities in the Muslim world today. As everybody knows, there are Jews living in the Muslim world for many years, and maybe we'll speak about it. So next one. These are ornaments. The pictures I took at the synagogue in Bursa, one of the synagogues in Turkey. There are other ornaments very similar to that in Izmir and other places. And what is remarkable about these Torah ornaments, we call them rimonim or pomegranates that sit on top of the Torah scroll, is that they also have the hilal, they have the crescent on top of a Sefer Torah, Torah ornament. It's quite unusual, especially for Ashkenazi Jews, for European Jews, to see something that looks like a symbol of a different religion or a different culture on top of a Torah scroll. I think it's quite remarkable, but it's something that teaches us that perhaps for many Jews and many generations, they did not see the local culture as in an innate conflict with their Jewish identity. Unlike Jews in Christian countries, where that conflict has been much more real and maybe even more dangerous for Jews in Christian communities. This is a letter. We are not sure if it was actually written by Maimonides or somebody who tried to copy Maimonides' handwriting, but it was written very, very close to the time when Maimonides was alive. The content is not as important as what I'm trying to point out here, which is very, very fascinating. It really doesn't matter if Maimonides himself wrote it or somebody imitating Maimonides, but he wrote here the word inshallah as meaning to say, hopefully, or with the help of God. And what is even more fascinating here, that the beginning of the word in Hebrew is insha, and then we have Allah written in Arabic. This is a Hebrew letter written in Hebrew letters. Shalom, shalom, la'achok ve'lakarov, signed Moshe ben Maimon. Again, I said, we're not sure if this is actually him or somebody who tried to copy his handwriting, but what's definitely here, it says, Insha'Allah. The fact that many people use the word inshallah today, that's normal. But for somebody, for a rabbi, or a rabbinic authority, or somebody imitating a rabbinic authority, to use the Arabic, not only the Arabic expression, but to use Arabic in their day-to-day language and in a letter, I think it is something fascinating, and it's also something which is very, very telling. It says a lot about the fact that Jews felt very comfortable. Of course, there are many exceptions, but the general feeling is that Jews did not feel rejected in many, many Muslim societies. Of course, Jews in what is today the Islamic expanse have very, very deep history. We heard so much before, a beautiful talk about the explosion from Spain. This is just one example. The very first book printed in the Ottoman Empire is a book, again, we have back to Maimonides. This is a book that was printed in 1493. The letters, it was quite fascinating, it was printed in Istanbul in 1493, 1494. The letters came from Spain, but Jews who were expelled, they bought paper in Venice, wrote the letters and the paper, and printed it in Istanbul. So this is the very first book that was printed in the Ottoman Empire by Sephardic Jews, printed it in Istanbul, and in those days it was still called Constantinople. Many, many names. Jews call it Kusta, short for Constantinople. Ashkenazi Jews who did not know that it was Kusta called it Kushta, but it was this book was printed in Istanbul. Quite few books followed, and then the Ottomans forbade printing books. And we had a long period of no print house in Istanbul because the Quran at the time was not allowed to be printed. And if Quran wasn't allowed to be printed, so were Jewish books not allowed to be printed. But Jews had a very long history in the Ottoman Empire. And before the Ottoman Empire, in the land, this is a picture of a ruin of a synagogue from the 2nd century in a city called Sardis. It was rediscovered in the 1960s. And it's a huge synagogue. It is holds place for about 1,000 people in a historical dig in Sardis. Quite amazing. Right outside of the synagogue, there are 17 shops, and I went there with the archaeologist, met the chief archaeologist making the dig, and he said, you know, of these 17 shops, 6 belong to Jews. But how do you know it belongs to Jews? But 3 of the 6 have Jewish names. One has said Yehuda, one says Yaakov. So we know that these shops belong to Jews, they're Jewish shops. But the other 3 shops, we know they belong to Jews because in the dig, we did not find non-kosher animal bones. The other shops had non-kosher fish or non-kosher animal bones, but these shops did not, so we know that they belonged. It was a restaurant or food shop, and they had only a kosher food remnants.
Part of Amsterdam, they found the Jewish homes. That's how they identified.
That's how they identified. So Amsterdam, not as it doesn't go as far back as the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th century. The Jews who lived in that city in Sardis, but that is quite fascinating. Jews have lived in that city since the 7th century BC. 2,700 years ago, Jews moved to that city, the city of Sardis. It's mentioned in the Bible. The Bible calls it Galut Yerushalayim Asher Bisfarad, the Jerusalem exile, which is in Sfarad. Now, Sfarad in those days was not Spain. Spain was not yet called Sfarad by the Jews. Sfarad was Sephardis, and that is a city which is called Sardis. So in Aramean, it's called Sephardis still today. And Galut Yerushalayim Asher Bisfarad. It's quite fascinating. Before you had the whole thing about Spain, names traveled. You know, we have New York. We have was before it was New Amsterdam, right? So the name of Amsterdam traveled all the way to the New Land, and the name Sfarad, Spain, traveled all the way from Sfardis to Spain. As Ashkenaz, which was a small village in Turkey, moved from Turkey to mean Germany or whatever it is. Nobody really knows why, but there are many other such examples. The Tzarfat, which is in Hebrew what they call France, is actually a city called Serafand in Lebanon. It's because of the similarity of the letters. France, which is the French named after Frank. It's that doesn't have a historic meaning. It's only from Charlemagne and on. It was called French or whatever it's called. But the Jews attached Tzarfat because it had some similar sounds and traveled the name. Anyway, so Jews lived in that place for many, many years. And very often when I speak about the Jews of Iran, people say, wow, still so many Jews in Iran. The 18,000 Jews in Iran, 80 functioning synagogues, and 26 kosher mikvahs. And Tehran itself has 7 kosher restaurants. And people tell me, wow, there's so many Jews in Iran. Say, we have a Jewish holiday dedicated for the Jews of Iran. Which one? Purim. Purim is a holiday dedicated, but for thousands of years. We have a whole book in the Bible about the Jews of Iran, about the Ahasuerus and the Jews who lived in Persia. And we have a holiday, and Jews still live in Iran. There are 18,000 Jews in Tehran, Isfahan, in Kermanshah, in Shiraz. Speak about fragmentation before. The Jews of Shiraz are more Orthodox leaning versus the Jews of Tehran, but it's quite a vibrant community. Here in this picture, we have a wedding. Just a couple of weeks ago. This is Chief Rabbi Gerami, Chief Rabbi of Iran. Here with a group of young students. There's day camps, schools. It's quite an incredible and interesting Jewish community. Still there. And very often people ask, why Jews of Iran are not leaving Iran? People ask this question all the time. Fair question. I also ask this question. They are happy there. They live there, the place where they grew up, long history. You all have a long history there, and they just continue their lives there. Many of them feel that if they leave Iran, they will lose their Jewish identity. They come very often and have Shabbat guests from Iran, from Shiraz, from Kermanshah, from Isfahan. They come to join our Shabbat table. And of course, they're much more conservative than Turkish Jews. And they don't like the fact that they come to the synagogue, people walk out of the synagogue in Istanbul and take off their kippahs. In Iran, they walk around with the kippah. And so they feel very much at home, very much comfortable. So there's still quite a large Jewish community in Iran. They are very worried that there's going to be a war, and they definitely do feel hostage in one way or another. Nevertheless, they are allowed to leave. It's not as if Jews of Iran are not allowed to leave. They are allowed to leave. They don't even need to have a special visa. They could just walk, take an ID card, and take a bus or a plane and come to Turkey. They don't need a visa. The whole family could leave. They just don't want to. The only people who cannot leave are youth from over the age of 16. Unless they're enrolled in university, they cannot leave because of the military service. Which is mandatory for everybody, including Jews. But otherwise, everybody can leave if they just want to. Another very ancient Jewish community is the Jewish community of Lebanon. And the Jews in Lebanon, yes, they are. Not many, but they are. About 60 Jews still living in Lebanon. 60, that's not a lot. But of course, probably the oldest in the world after the Holy Land are the Jews of Lebanon, because simply geographically, Lebanon in ancient times, parts of Lebanon were part of the ancient land of Israel or whatever, and closest Jewish community to Israel. And there are still about 60 Jews in Lebanon. And again, Jews in Lebanon are not held hostage in Lebanon. If they want, they can leave. Most of them have French passports because of the French mandate at the time. This is the synagogue of the Magen Avot synagogue in Lebanon, very close to the port. Remember, a few years ago, there was a big blast of ammonium. The synagogue was also affected, or was rebuilt or repainted. Windows were installed back. Synagogue is in good standing, though because of the political situation, because especially until the recent war, when Hezbollah was very, very dominant in Beirut, in South Beirut, where the synagogue is, Jews did not feel comfortable coming close to the synagogue. They did not want to be identified as Jews, because of course, if you identify as Jews, you are immediately a suspect of being a spy for Israel. So the synagogue is not very much in use. Nevertheless, it's still standing, and the Jewish people are gathering for religious services in private homes rather than using the synagogue. I'm not bringing here pictures of the Jewish community of Syria, really community. There are about 6 Jews living in Syria, not many, 1 in homes. There are 23 synagogues in Damascus alone, still standing, just the people. In Aleppo, there are none. All the synagogues in Aleppo, homes are all destroyed. In Damascus itself, there are 23 synagogues which are still standing. So if you know, that I think that breaks the record of 2 Jews, 3 synagogues. 7 Jews to 23. I think one of the only countries in the Middle East that probably never had a real Jewish community is Jordan. That's quite interesting. Very close to Israel, but never had any significant Jewish community. Yes, of course. In ancient times, in antiquity, there were also right outside of Amman, with Jewish cemetery. Aaron Cohen was buried in Jordan and Horaha, but also right outside of Amman, there's a historical dig of a house of a very affluent Jewish community from antiquity, somebody called Beit Tuvia, the house of Tuvia. It's a very, very famous archaeological dig in Amman, but that is, of course, from antiquity, nothing from recent or recorded history. New Jewish communities, however, are popping up across the Muslim world with the Abrahamic Accords and a little bit before. Of course, here we have the Jewish community of the UAE, the United Arab Emirates. One of the most beautiful projects of coexistence, of tolerance, is the Abrahamic House. In Abu Dhabi, we have here, there's a church, a mosque, and a synagogue. This is the official synagogue of the United Arab Emirates. It's quite interesting that symbolically they within one compound they have 3 buildings, 3 religions, each one facing a different direction. One is facing the Kaaba in Saudi Arabia. One is facing Jerusalem. One is facing Rome. But they're all at the same height. That is following the philosophy of historically, in many Muslim worlds, the synagogue church was not allowed to be built taller than the mosque. That one of the reasons why famous synagogue in Jerusalem was called the Huba, or the broken home, it kept on being broken because it was a little bit taller than the mosque, which was right next to it. But here, symbolically, they made them all the same height. This is a synagogue that is operated, run, financed by the Emirati authorities. That is the tricky thing. So in Abu Dhabi, there are quite a few Jews, about 1,000 Jews, but unlike other religions, religious Jews have to live within walking distance to the synagogue. And in walking distance in Abu Dhabi, when it's 50 degrees outside, it's about 10 meters. So unless you live across the street from the synagogue is not going to be useful. When they built it, I'm not sure they actually knew and realized. So they didn't realize that. So on Yom Kippur, the Abu Dhabi government brings like 10, 15 caravans so people could sleep close to the synagogue. There's no hotels, no houses. It's about an hour walk in normal weather conditions. So really feasible to have over there regular Shabbat services, but the mere existence of this is quite remarkable. It's very remarkable in Abu Dhabi and in Dubai. Jewish life is very much not only tolerated, respected, and that is before the Abrahamic Accords. And in many ways, you could say that the fact that Jews are able to live Jewish life is what brings peace to the Middle East, and that is what I try to argue. If you could also, I just gave an interview. You could follow on YouTube. Search up my name. I have gave a podcast. I think that Jewish life or Jews living in the Muslim world is the best example of what tolerance can be and coexistence can be. Because if we speak politics, politics is always going to divide us. But when we speak from a religious perspective, Muslim societies, which are much more traditional than Christian societies, can understand and respect the fact that people of all faiths have a place and have the ability to perform and to express their religious convictions. Hasn't always been that way, but it is. I don't want to paint it all very, very always rosy, but definitely there is a very strong emphasis about this in many, many. Sorry. Of course, many pogroms. It's not. I don't want to negate that, but you can't compare that to the experience in the Christian. Okay, so don't want to say it was all always very rosy, but compared to other places, it can't. It doesn't come close. Qatar is in the news, right? Doha, many conflicting views about Doha. So this is my son Eli. He's a rabbi in Doha. Rabbi in Qatar. This is here during the Mondial, it's called the World Cup. Very hot. There are about 200 Jews living in Doha right now, and 200, not a very big community. But the Jewish community in Doha and the authorities in Doha are very much in support of Jewish life in Doha, though on one condition that it's not published and there's no photography. And that is very interesting. So my son is in Doha at every holiday. This past Pesach, there were about 45 people who came to the Seder, and there were outside about 45 Qatari police and security forces, making sure that it is all protected and that nobody walks into the Seder with the camera, which for an Orthodox rabbi is really a great thing. Nobody comes in with on Erev Yom Kippur, there was a Qatari official sitting at the door taking everybody's phones, and they charged the affair of the American embassy, the Jewish lady, and she comes, and the guy says, "Give me the phone." Well, the phone is property of the United States. I'm not giving it to any Qatari to hold it. And it said, "Well, I'm very sorry, you can't walk into the synagogue with the phone because no pictures, no photography is allowed." They had to waited for 30 minutes until somebody from the embassy came to be able to hold the phones so she could go inside for Kol Nidre until after the stadium. So, yeah. So there are about 200 Jews in Qatar. There's some Jewish life form every holiday. There's a special permits to have the whole Jewish life. But probably the biggest question is what's going to be Jewish life in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is a very large country. It's a center of the Islamic faith. It's the only country in the world that has no church, no synagogue, and no religion is allowed to be openly practiced besides Islam. And there are about 2,000 Jews living in Saudi Arabia. We are all waiting 2,000 Jews living in Saudi Arabia, expats, mostly working in different companies, diplomatic missions. I've been there several times, and that's going to be very tricky. Saudi Arabia is opening up to the West. Crown Prince and his government are trying to bring in investments, tourism, trying to sort of steer the country in towards openness to the West. How are they going to do that is a big question. Will they allow for Jewish life and expression? Big question. Yes, the government wants to open up towards that, but there are also very, very strong traditional forces and voices in Saudi Arabia which oppose opening up to the West. Big question. We don't know what will be. We do hope that at least in some segregated areas, they will allow for foreigners to perform their religious duties and be able to have services. I will open questions a little bit later if you don't mind. This is gentleman's name is Rabbi Herzog. He's a businessman. He does went to Saudi Arabia quite often before. Yeah, one more question, then I want to continue. This is a picture in Auschwitz. The reason why I put this picture is because Muhammad al-Isa is the head of the Islamic law. And I think 5 or 6 years ago, he went to Auschwitz with a delegation from the Islamic League. And he spoke at the synagogue in Warsaw. Muhammad al-Isa is a front man for the Saudi government. He doesn't have executive rights, but he is sort of a representative of the Saudi government to the West. Not a diplomatic representative, but a cultural representative. He gave the speech last year during the Hajj, which is a very, very important and symbolism to it. The fact that somebody who has extended his hand to peace, to other religion, gave such an important sermon, and a very, very positive force within Saudi society. He went to Auschwitz, constantly in touch with Jewish organizations, rabbis, and a very, very important and positive person in Saudi Arabia. Okay, I come from Turkey. Mentioned before, Turkey has a very long Jewish history, going back for thousands of years. Mentioned before, then when Rabbi Sola moved and had a huge revolution in Suriname and a fight in Suriname. I want to mention here that I'm the rabbi of the Ashkenazi community in Turkey. Many people say, "What? The Ashkenazi community in Turkey? Turkey is a very Sephardic country," and it's very true. The Ashkenazi Jews were in Turkey before the Sephardic came. Very small Jewish community, but the Sephardi Jews came after 1492. But when they came to Turkey, there were already Jewish communities there. There was the Ashkenazi community in Turkey, or that preceded the Sephardic 200 years. But before that, we had the Jewish community, which is called the Romaniyot Jewish community. The Romaniyot are the Jews of the Roman Empire, and more precisely, of the Eastern Roman Empire. Jews who lived in Greece, in Little Asia, in Asia Minor, in Turkey, in Syria. These are the Romaniyot Jews, the Roman Jews, the Jews of Byzantine, and Jews have lived there for hundreds and thousands of years. The Romaniyot Jews, it's a whole different talk, have slowly integrated into the Sephardic Jewish community, while the Ashkenazi Jews have always maintained a distinct color and distinct custom even within the Ottoman Empire. So that's me with the late Chacham Bashi, or the head rabbi, Rabbi Chitrik, died 4 months ago in Istanbul. And this is the picture of the Italian Jewish synagogue Italian synagogue in Istanbul. Istanbul today has about 16 synagogues, about 12, 16 still functioning synagogues, 12,000 Jews, while the Jewish community of Izmir is about 1,200 Jews. And how many synagogues? About 20. Yes, about 20 synagogues in Izmir. Though I believe that only two synagogues, the Sha'ar Shamayim and Bet Israel, are very active or active every Shabbat. There are other synagogues in Izmir which are active on a rotating basis, the Al-Ghazi, Senora, Bikur Holim, and other synagogues in that region in Karatash. But there are about 20 synagogues still open and still functioning. If you ever go to Izmir, definitely make sure to go check out the Havra Street, which is the synagogue street. It's one road that has 10 or 12 synagogues right next to each other. At a very, very beautiful place. 2 months ago, we went with the C team group from Istanbul, and we traveled to Izmir to check out and to visit all these beautiful synagogues, which are right next to each other. So there's still about 12 to 13,000 Jews living in Turkey. Turkiye, changed its name, and we have synagogues and Jewish communities in Izmir, in Istanbul, in Bursa. Until 2 years ago, we had a small community in Antakya. Unfortunately, synagogue has collapsed with the earthquake that we had 2 years ago. But it's basically what we're. There's synagogues that still stand in other places, but the main communities are in Istanbul and in Izmir. Sure. No, it's being when I said that the Jews, the first, what we call the Ashkenazi rite or the Ashkenazi way of practice, are Jews of moved to Byzantine or Constantinople in 1250 after they were expelled from Hungary. So I speak about Ashkenazi Jews. There is a village actually on the Black Sea called Iskenaz, and that is probably where the name Ashkenaz comes from. The word Ashkenaz is first mentioned in the Bible as the grandson of Noah. One of them was called Ashkenaz, and as we know that Noah, the story of the flood, something that happened in the vicinity of today Anatolia. One of the villages is called Iskenaz, Ashkenaz, named after the grandson of Noah. It's still a village, it's still there, not far from Trabzon, for those who know the region. These are pictures of a conference that we had in Istanbul about 3 years ago. And this is an anecdote. We had a conference of rabbis of Islamic State. We gathered in Istanbul, and rabbis from Iran, Turkey, from Tunisia, from Morocco, from Albania, Kosovo, from a whole bunch of places. And while we're in Istanbul, I get a phone call from president's office, and they said the president wants to meet with the rabbis. And I tell the secretary, says, well, the rabbis are already here. We're not going to Ankara unless you send us a plane. And about an hour later, I get a call and says, well, the plane is ready. It's 1 o'clock. So I said, well, we're supposed to have dinner in Neve Shalom, but okay, we'll move the dinner to the president's palace in Ankara. Packed up all the food, sent with the mashgiach to kosher the president's office. We all got on a plane, and we flew in to meet President Erdogan. It was 3-4 years ago. It was an amazing conference. I do want to argue with the fact that definitely President Erdogan does not like Israel, but he is not an anti-Semite. We sat at the president's office. It was quite amazing. Sat there for like 4 hours with President Erdogan. There was the chief rabbi of Azerbaijan, there was the chief rabbi of Iran, rabbi of Russia. We were 50 rabbis sitting at, and I'll just give you one anecdote of what happened here. There was a rabbi of North Cyprus. I happened to be with him on the same plane today when we came from. And he turned to President Erdogan and he says, President Erdogan, can you help me? He says, what? He says, I live in North Cyprus occupied North Cyprus, okay, occupied by Turkey. I live in North Cyprus for 15 years. We need a synagogue. And Erdogan says, no, synagogue in North Cyprus? He says, no. And this was very, very spontaneous. Erdogan says, let me have his telephone. Please get the president of North Cyprus on the phone. And we're all sitting there. And he takes the phone and he tells President of North Cyprus, says, Tatao Bey, or Mr. Tatao, that's his last name, says, your chief rabbi is sitting at my table, and you don't have a synagogue. This is, and he used the word ayipta, which means this is shameful for me. That the rabbi is sitting at my table and he says there's no synagogue. Then what would have happened if we would hear of a Muslim going to some European country, no mosque? We would be livid. And the rabbi sitting here and he says that there's no synagogue. And he turns to us and says, the land is on me, I'll pay for it, but you will have to build a synagogue. It's something that happened in front of my eyes. Spontaneous, unscripted. So to say that Erdogan is an anti-Semite, I don't think it is true. I think it's very not true. Definitely doesn't like Israel, but he's not an anti-Semite. It actually did not happen because Jews like to fight. That's why it didn't happen. The land was allocated, and then, of course, the fight started. Who is going to control the land? That's why it didn't. It's still in plan, but that is why it did not materialize. Okay. Speak about the Jewish communities of North Africa, Morocco, Tunisia. I don't know if we have a lot of time, but 5 minutes. Okay. So, of course, the historic communities of Morocco and Tunisia. The Jewish community in Morocco is about 2,000 people. Jewish community in Tunisia about 1,300, mostly concentrated in the Djerba. Djerba is really, if you want to see what is an authentic Jewish community of North Africa, it's in Djerba. Djerba is a beautiful Jewish community. Unfortunately, there was a terrorist attack there in Lag BaOmer 2 years ago. I was there the day after, during the funeral of the two people who were killed by a member of the security forces, somebody who was stationed in Lag BaOmer at the Lagriba synagogue in order to protect the Jewish community, and one of the policemen turned his weapons and shot Jews attending the Lag BaOmer festivity. But if you want to see an authentic Jewish community, got to go to Djerba. They're a small community concentrated on this island. Jews who are not leaving Djerba, living there. Most of them are gold merchants or selling gold in the market. Many of them are Kohanim, or descendants of Kohanim. With a rabbi called Rabbi Mendy suggest to everybody to go visit this Jewish community. It's a wonderful place, small, tight-knit Jewish community, and I tell everybody to please go and visit them. Beautiful place on the Mediterranean. But I think I want to end my speech, because it could go on and on. There are many, many Jewish communities. I want to end with this Jewish community of Azerbaijan.
Kuba.
Kuba. So yes, so you have here a picture of the Jewish community of Kuba, one of the only Jewish towns. A town which is made of Jews only in Kuba, in Azerbaijan. It's called Kırmızı Kasaba, or the Red Roof Village. There's about 15,000 Jews still living in Azerbaijan. But Azerbaijan is unique in the fact that they are diligently working on showing the Jews are an integral part of Azerbaijan history. This is a picture by the dedication of one of Azerbaijan's national heroes. His name was Avraham Albert Aharonov. He's a national hero because he died during one of Azerbaijan war with Armenia. Not something very popular in Europe, but the reason why it's not popular in Europe is simply because Armenia is Christian and Azerbaijan is Muslim. And naturally, European countries take the Armenian side. Jews are not part of this conflict. But there was a Jewish man, his name is Albert Agarunov, and he was a soldier or commander of a tank in the war. And he was an Azerbaijani, and there's a really coincidentally, there's a video of him sitting in his tank. And the guy's videoing asking, "What's your name?" He says, "My name is Albert." He says, "What is Albert?" He says, "Well, my name is Abraham. And I am a Jew, an Azerbaijani Jew, and I am fighting the war here." The guy says, "Why are you Jewish and fighting?" He says, "Because I'm an Azeri Jew, Azerbaijani Jew, and Azerbaijan is my home." 3 days later, he died in the war after the video was taken. But this became really a symbol for Azerbaijan, how all citizens of Azerbaijan are part of the Azerbaijan history. And that's why they declared him, Albert Agarunov, as a hero of Azerbaijan. And they have pictures of him, and they have a day dedicated to Albert Agarunov. And there are monuments of Albert Agarunov on the streets of Azerbaijan. And I think this is a very, very important and concentrated effort by the Azerbaijan government to show that Jews are an integral part of the Azerbaijan history. That's why the Azerbaijani government supports the the Baku Jewish School. They support the Jewish communities. There are 3 Jewish communities in Azerbaijan. There are mountain Jews, which are the Jews of Kirmizika Saba, and there are Georgian Jews. Jews came from Georgia and settled in Azerbaijan, and of course, Ashkenazi Jews who came from the Soviet Union and settled in Azerbaijan during the Soviet occupation. Very, very famous Soviet Ukrainian Jew who lived in Azerbaijan. Maybe I'll speak about him tonight. It's Dr. Ilyasov, very, very famous Jewish physician. Maybe I'll speak about him tonight. As I said, they're divided. There's mountain Jews, which are their own creed. They're Jews of the Caucasus. There are Georgian Jews, also separate. Today, most people paint a big Sephardic brush on Iranian, Iraqi, Tunisian, Moroccan, Spanish. All are called general term of Sephardic Jews. They're not really Sephardic because they never came from Spain. They are Eastern Jews. Caucasian Jews are Jews who came from Iran and moved to the mountains, and they're called mountain Jews by Soviet propaganda. They still call themselves mountain Jews, but they're not Spanish. They didn't come from Spain. They are definitely more aligned with Sephardic Jews or Sephardic way of thinking or custom, but they're not Sephardic. Didn't come from Spain. They're their own. Same with Georgian Jews. Georgian Jews have 2,000-year history or more in Georgia. Not Sephardic, but they are, in the general terms of people call them today Sephardic Jews, but they're not Sephardim. They did not come from Spain or Portugal. They're not from Iberia. I am not sure. I don't know if they were. I don't know. I'm not a statistician. Jews lived in Spain for many, many years, of course, but I don't know the numbers. It's very, very difficult to. You know, let me just let me just mention something. I did mention it before to the rabbi, and with this I'll finish. Jews who moved out of Spain, the Jews who left Spain in 1492, were generally speaking are the more religious Jews. It's something which is overlooked by many people, but those who moved out of Spain are the Jews who wanted to wear their Jewish identity on the outside. People who wanted to practice their Judaism moved out of Spain. People who chose not to remained in Spain. There's a long history of Jews in Spain, of course. Jews converted to Christianity in Spain for many years before the Inquisition, willingly or unwillingly, but many of them willingly. Jews converted to Christianity. There were riots in 1391, but Jewish history in Spain finished in 1492, more or less. But the Jews who moved out in 1492 were mostly very religious Jews. They came to North Africa, to Italy, and to the Ottoman Empire, and they had a big fight with local Jewish communities. They had huge fights, and the main fights were, these were communities that lived there, but not very knowledgeable communities. And in one day, a Jewish community, take Salonika, or Istanbul, or Izmir, has a community with 2 rabbis, 3 rabbis, small Jewish community, and in one day they have another 2,000, 3,000 rabbis who come in and invade the community. Imagine what would happen. How many rabbis you have here? 2, and tomorrow you have another 30 rabbis, and each one wants to give the speech in the synagogue. Every rabbi found a new congregation, and it's a social issue. The first thing that the Jews of Spain did was not to eat the local shechita, not to eat the meat slaughtered in North Africa or Spain or Turkey or Istanbul and Izmir. There was huge fights, and it took many generations for these fights to calm down. Today in Yemen, there's only one known Jew. His name is Levi Maghrabi, and he's in jail. He's jailed by the Houthi. In Abu Dhabi, interestingly, there are about 50 or 60 Yemenite Jews that were rescued by the Abu Dhabi government, and they are Jews of the Arabian Peninsula. They live in Abu Dhabi, all expenses covered by the Abu Dhabi government. They've been there for 7 or 8 years now. Okay.
We'll still have more from Rabbi Chitrik, so keep your attention antennas on. We do have to move on to the next part. I just want to share one story with Rabbi Chitrik, which you can maybe add to your thing. Some people here will remember there was a fellow named Simon Magrizo who used to live here. No, he used to live here. And he was, some people will say he was a fanatic Jew because he put on tefillin every day and he ate only kosher and he was, some people would consider, but he was definitely a fanatic Boy Scout. And he didn't miss his Boy Scout camp. And at one point there was a Boy Scout camp in Saudi Arabia. And he went, but he didn't know what's he going to do with his film. And he found an abandoned container, containers by the kitchen area. So he went in every day to put on film, and nobody noticed that. One day, at one point, he was reading his Chumash, and there was an African fellow who said, "What language is that?" And he said, "It's Russian."
So I was at a taxi a couple months ago in Istanbul, and I read the news on my phone, and the guy looks at my phone and says, "What is that?" I said, "This is Hebrew, Ibranije, we say in Turkish." So he said, "Where do people speak Hebrew?" So I said, "People speak Hebrew in Hebristan." He looks at me and he says, what do you mean Hebrewistan? I never heard of such a country. So I said, well, you should know that Jews read Hebrew. He says, what do you mean Jews read Hebrew? I said, well, Jews live in Israel and they read Hebrew. He says, that doesn't really make sense because Turks speak Turkish and live in Turkey. And you're taking here many, many terms and you mix them together. So I tried to give a very short synopsis of Jewish history. I said that in Turkey, Jews are called Musevi. Musevi because Mosaic, because we follow the law of Moses. But we are called Jews because we belong to the tribe of Judea. And the tribe of Judea is just one part of the people of Israel. And we use a language called Hebrew because Abraham was called the Ivri. So we have Hebrews, who are also Israelites, also Jews of Judea, and we also called following the Mosaic law. All four terms are correct. So back to your Hebrew and Russian. It's not that from Hebrewistan, it's fine.
Okay.